Hello and welcome to the 42 Rugby Weekly. This podcast is brought to you in association with William Hill. Remember to gamble responsibly and visit dunlewy.net on how to do so. Gavan Casey here, and I'm joined as always by my colleague with the 42.e, Murray Kinsella. Murray, how are things on your end?
Very good, Gav. How are you?
I am splendid, thank you very much, and delighted to be joined as well by the big man, Bernard Jackman. Bernard, how are things? How's your week been?
Yeah, it's been good. Lots of, even though there's no Six Nations, huge amount of rugby stuff, content to talk about. And yeah, when I saw your itinerary last night, I was excited for this chat.
Yeah, I'm going to try and reel that off now to the best of my memory. I did send sort of a couple of bullet points into the lads into the WhatsApp group to tee up what we might chat about. And I thought you might slice it up a little bit and take a few bits out. But no, you were both keen to go through it all. So we'll talk about both Six Nations games just gone, because that Wales-England game was absolutely incredible in a number of ways. Obviously, we'll delve into Italy-Ireland a bit as well. Let's chat about the Lions tour and some of the proposals there. It does feel as though a home tour is looming, and I definitely liked the idea of that when it was first broached, but I've probably pulled a Yui a little bit in terms of my own perception of that now. At this stage, I'm really keen to hear your thoughts on that later on. What else did I say? We chat about France and the bubble and Fabien Galtier and all that. Let's get the lads' final word on that one. And we've got loads of questions from the members and probably a few things that I'm forgetting as well. But we're going to kick off. Interpro preview towards the end of the show. We're going to kick off though with the news of contracts, which I know isn't everybody's idea of the most electrifying conversation, but just as we record, the IRFU confirmed that Peter O'Mahony has had his central contract extended by 2 years, and obviously a few days back Johnny Sexton extended his formally by a year. Let's start with O'Mahony, Murray, and I see some people kind of acting as though they're a little bit surprised or that he might be fortunate to get a 2-year deal, and I kind of think captain of Munster and has actually been one of Ireland's best players for the last 18 months, regardless of what people think of him. I know there's like the very recent red card against Wales, which probably a little bit of like recency bias can leave a sour taste, if you like, but I think he warrants a central contract. Personally, I'd love to get your thoughts on it, and maybe you can tell me I'm wrong.
I'm not surprised by it. I thought it would be a 2-year central contract for him. As you say, he's the Munster skipper, the leader down there. He's part of the Ireland leadership group, and I agree with you. I think his form for Ireland prior to that red card obviously was really strong, and he'd been one of the key guys. Even you think back to the start of the 2020 Six Nations when he actually had dropped out of the team and responded very strongly. And he's not that old, you know. It's different to Johnny Sexton in that case. He's in his 30s now, yes, but certainly will feel there's plenty more road ahead of him, and that he can manage himself very well and continue to perform at the highest level. And clearly that's how the IRFU, David Nucifora, and the people making those decisions feel as well, that there's loads more top class, world class performances in Peter O'Mahony. That's what they're saying by giving him this 2-year deal. Now at the same time, there are, as always, a number of really talented back rows in Ireland. And even right now, if Peter O'Mahony came back into the mix, Tadhg has played some excellent rugby in the back row just very recently as well. And your second row combination is settled. So there's probably not I suppose the question mark is Peter O'Mahony always going to be guaranteed into that Ireland team, which you want your central contracted players really to be, given they're the ones earning the big bucks or the bigger bucks. So it's I suppose a question in the back of my mind in that regard is how he comes back again with Ireland. Generally, he has come back pretty strongly and performed really well when he's had his back against the wall, which is a number of times. And for some people, he'll just never convince them. He's one of those guys that a lot of even Ireland rugby fans, they just seem to dislike and want him gone from the team. And that will always be the case. But I can see the decision making sense from their point of view, but that'll have to be backed up by really strong performances, because you don't want to get into a situation where your centrally contracted players don't warrant selection in the Ireland team. Even at the moment, it's interesting that Bundy Aki probably won't play a minute of the championship, and he's a centrally contracted player. Now, you've obviously got 3 quality centres all on central deals, which makes it trickier. But you don't want to get into a situation where your money is gone in the wrong place. So definitely it's on Peter O'Mahony to bounce back strongly again, but I really wouldn't be surprised to see him back and doing that pretty soon when that ban is finished.
No, and Bernard, I totally understand the logic behind wanting your centrally contracted players to be absolutely key figures in the international team and not guys that are cast aside or benched or even out of the reckoning completely. It's just kind of not a good look. It doesn't feel prudent. But I wonder with the idea of guaranteed starters, do we need to even move away from that a little bit? Like, I don't know how healthy it is either for centrally contracted players to be expected to start for their country, like in every game, no matter what. It should be and largely is dictated by form, but maybe when you look at Ireland over the last sort of 5 or so years, one of our problems has been that guys have been absolutely cemented into those positions. And as much as, yes, you want centrally contracted players to figure for Ireland when in form, it doesn't guarantee them a place either and shouldn't.
No, definitely shouldn't. And I think the whole reason I think that central contracts were important historically were for flight risks. So it was a way of the IRFU being able to financially compensate their star players to keep them in Ireland and fend off English or French clubs. And I think it's worked really well. And even the Johnny Sexton, the Racing one was around a central contract and the value of that and longevity, etc. The Donegal Ryan one was the same. It was the duration. Racing offered them longer term. So I'm probably surprised, to be honest, given the financial climate we're in, that the IRFU didn't probably try and stick to 1 year contracts, 1 year central contracts, just to let everything settle down, let the game find its feet again and get a better picture of what the income streams are going to be like. But from a player point of view, obviously, if you can negotiate a 2 year contract or a 3 year contract, you're in a much better place. And realistically, there's no pressure on the Irish coach when he sits down to pick his team to include the central contract players. I mean, Bundy, he's a great example from Murray there. I felt maybe he'd play in Italy just, because he's not far behind the others at the moment, and it would have been a great opportunity to use him. Obviously, Farrell decided to stick with Robbie and Gary, and that's fine. The only thing is, subliminally, there is sometimes pressure, especially if you've been the one who's kind of pushed for that player to get a central contract, and you would have to believe that Nusafora does involve, his coaching staff in those decisions, and that's maybe where it gets a little bit messy. But from an Irish player's point of view and from an Irish rugby fan's point of view, seeing these players week by week, whether it's provincial or at international level, get tied down is reassuring, but I would believe wholeheartedly that it doesn't guarantee him a starting place or any of them a starting place at all. And I actually thought, to be honest, I thought the balance to the back row against Italy was good, and I thought if Doris was fit, it'd be really interesting to see where we went with our back row. So yeah, I'm not sure Peter's the first choice for Scotland or England. Obviously not on form, but just in terms of what Will Connors can give you, what terms of Ty Byrne gives you at 6 as well. It's going to be very interesting. We've, like every country, we have a huge amount of talented back rows, so it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Just on the central contract thing, Gav, the impression from a lot of people would be that if you're on a central contract, you're going to be starting for Ireland, and if you go back through teams over the last number of years, that has been the case. And I do worry that there is that pressure. I suppose the coach thinks this guy's the big earner, we've got to justify and play him at times. And then at the same time, the reason a person is on a central contract is because they've been the best player on a consistent basis for a long period of time, because behind the scenes, they're the key influences. They're pushing teammates, they're raising standards, they're doing loads of things that we don't even see, as well as their performances on the pitch over a longer period of time. It's not just about your red card in the last game, or not just about one poor performance pockmarked in there amongst a series of strong ones. But it is a really interesting, I suppose, quirk to Irish rugby that guys go on to central contracts, and then I think there is that bit of pressure for them to start for Ireland. And Peter O'Mahony has a 2-year deal now. If in a year's time he doesn't warrant a place in the Ireland team, there's still that little sense in the back of your mind, we need to get value out of this. And the same with Johnny Sexton on another 1 year. That's what the IRFU are doing here. I think their sense is that these two guys are still going to be in the first team in a year's time. And if their form doesn't warrant that, that's when it becomes an issue.
Well, let me ask you a question that was put to yourself and Bernard by Robin Dempsey in the 42 members rugby WhatsApp group, members.the42.ie. If you want to join the good folks in the group, a legendary group, I think, at this stage. Robin was saying, do the IRFU need to reevaluate the central contract model? And I'll stick with yourself here, Murray. I believe there are 16 to 18 central contracts available. Would they be better off having the provinces pay a basic salary and then allocating central top-ups to a wider group of 30 to 35 players?
Yeah, that would be another way of doing it. And there's certainly sense in that. It possibly becomes a little bit messier, I would imagine, in terms of all those different various top-ups, what the value of each one is, people maybe bickering over which game is more valuable than the other. And I agree, like, it has been a means of keeping players here and your very best players here and keeping them out of the clutches of maybe more lucrative deals abroad, because you've got a central contract, you know you're going to be managed extremely well, better than anyone else in the world, really, and that's a big part of it. I don't think it's quite time to rip up this central contracting system, and it is a good way of keeping players here, but I do think Bernard's right in saying that they need to be really financially prudent with it and really calculated with it and really pushing their end of it. It's, from Peter Manny's point of view, brilliant to get a 2-year deal and keep doing what he's been doing. But the IRFU have to be absolutely nailed on with all these decisions, all the more so as the climate is so difficult at the moment.
You mentioned Will Connors standing out in Rome, Bernard, and we'll get your impressions on the game as a whole now. Even when we were chatting last night, I was asking you guys, like, were there any specific things you wanted to talk about from the game? And I'm sure there are, but just in a kind of it's not an immediate reaction on a Thursday, but what did you make of the game and Ireland's performance? If I was asked you to grade it, like, from 1 to 10, 10 being excellent, 1 being Georgia's second half in the autumn, what were we looking at last weekend?
I'd say seven really. Intent, energy, work rate, probably 9, but I think they'll be very disappointed with the second half in terms of just really executing. Obviously, we left some scores behind. They were down to 13 men, for a couple of minutes. We just weren't really clinical, and obviously, we got a great try at the end in injury time, but I felt the first half we did a lot of really good work, and we set the scene to go and finish the second half really strong. And I just didn't feel that there was that real ruthlessness there or being clinical. We weren't as clinical as we needed to be. And I thought it was interesting. I don't know. I'm wondering about the dynamic and kind of the sense of reality in the squad. And like, I thought the post-match comments were like kind of maybe overestimating how good they were and what an achievement it was. And, like, realistically, if, like, talking about the character we showed and stuff, like, I think even if Ireland were in a really bad place, they'd still go to Italy at the moment and be able to put 40 points on them. You know what I mean? And I know it was important, and the team were disappointed with the 2 previous losses. And maybe they feel that the world's against them and the pundits are against them and all that stuff, and how dare we question them. But I do think that they're where they kind of well, we got to beat Scotland anyway. I mean, that's the key one for me. But I just wonder. I mean, I look back at what England and France said post Italy, and there was no kind of we're right up there. You know what I mean? It was just given. It was a given that they'd go and win. And in fairness, I don't think none of us are questioning the Irish team's character at all. I mean, in actual fact, I feel sorry for them in terms of some of the effort they're putting in and not getting the results, because there looks like to be structural issues and a lack of understanding or a lack of being clinical, which is obviously not helping us. So yeah, I hope that they realize that we're all behind them, and there's still elements of the game they need to put in place. And yeah, that was the most surprising thing for me. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think Robbie Henshaw is going to be nervous playing against Carlos Cana. You know what I mean? He's 50 caps, and like we should just back ourselves to go out and just put him away, and realize that unfortunately at the moment Italy isn't a barometer of where you're at. It just isn't, and like understand that, yeah, that's all really. Because I think if we think we've practiced because we beat Italy, we'll fall short later on, and maybe we haven't. Maybe I read the kind of the post match wrong, but that would be the only thing that concerned me, or the thing that probably from the match that stood out to me the most was kind of how good we thought we were when I didn't think we were absolutely brilliant.
We'll talk about what Ireland did well, Murray, as well. But just to pick up on what Bernard was saying there, post-match comments and maybe the general vibe of emanating from that Ireland setup after a win against Italy. Like, you couldn't begrudge fellas being happy with the day's work, and it did maybe feel as though they were responding to something, probably their own bad form and how it's been portrayed in the media as they see it. From our point of view, I think we'd probably say it's been fair enough. Like, they haven't been winning sort of big matches or matches against teams ranked above them in the world rankings, or teams that they were able to hang with a couple of years ago. I don't think anybody has strayed into, at least in media terms, it's rare that people would stray into sort of like personal criticism. I think it's really just criticism of performance, and it doesn't necessarily get personal. But then we know for sure that, like, in the last regime, if you like, under Schmidt, Joe Schmidt was extremely media averse. Probably to the detriment of his own sanity at times, like, would have paid attention an awful lot to what was going on in the media, including your own work, probably both of you guys, newspapers, online punditry, TV, radio, and so on. That probably had a little bit of a trickle-down effect as well to some of the leaders in the team with whom he was in conversation often. Johnny Sexton has a very similar attitude. He's probably actually a little bit more media-averse, to be totally honest. And he remains the captain now, and we've seen it even over the course of this Six Nations kind of spikiness towards journalists, which is no harm at all, don't get me wrong. I don't think anybody is that sensitive, but it does speak to a kind of like an almost paranoia, really, in terms of the criticism they're getting. I think Sexton was talking about the France game last week, and he kind of mentioned something along the lines of, like, I'm always amazed by the extent to which people can talk about just one game. But, like, the criticism following the France game really wasn't just about the France game. It was about a sort of a 12-month, 18-month trend. So I wonder, when they're doing those sort of post-match interviews and they're talking about character, do they feel their character actually is being questioned, when in reality I don't think it is? Because, like, certainly on this podcast, we've spoken about, even in those games that they aren't winning, the fact that, like, they're playing to the final whistle, which sounds like an awful cliche, but it does actually speak to something as well, in terms of, like, a team that is going places. That's an absolutely key trait as well. The other pieces mightn't be fully in place yet, but the fact that they don't sort of roll over, that the body language isn't actually terrible, even if they're down by a couple of scores, like that's a good sign. You know what I mean? So if anything, I'd say we've done the opposite of question their character, but just question their form, and maybe they've taken it more personally than it's been dished out, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so if we get in their heads, like, they're not going to be going, oh, we haven't played a brilliant game since 2018. We haven't beaten a big team since 2018. In their minds, they finished the autumn campaign last year on a real high against Scotland. They felt they turned a bit of a corner there, come into this Six Nations with a bit more idea of what they wanted to do, a bit more settled team. They look at a red card in Wales and go, how do you expect us really to win that? We very nearly did. They look at the, 6 key players missing for the France game. To be fair, they were down some absolutely essential guys, massive upheaval in the space of a week when you're losing that massive chunk of your team. And they think the criticism was completely out of scale for that. They feel they've done little things that were right. They feel in Italy that they showed a little bit more what they're about. And if we look at it, their line-out attack was certainly much better, something that we've criticised. There was a lot more detail around that. Even the Ian Henderson, what should have been his try, it was a great build-up, lovely timing around the corner. Everyone knew exactly where they're supposed to be. The Hugo Keenan try, which we discussed on the pod on Monday as well, really excellent score. And in the second half, from their point of view, yes, they'll be frustrated with it, but they'll also look at things like a couple of penalty decisions going against them, the kind of stop-start nature of the game that wasn't completely all in their hands. That's how they view it. Maybe they're on a different planet and they're being like deliberately ignorant of certain things and realities that we see, but that's how they operate. Absolutely. It's different to how we view it. They're not going to be pessimistic about things. They feel the Italy game was a turning point and momentum's back in the camp. Confidence is back there, and that they're moving the right direction to take on a Scotland team now who, yes, have been better in this championship, obviously really impressive against England, but I think the Irish players will still believe we're better than these guys. Let's use this as a chance to probably get that landmark win that we've spoken about on a number of occasions on this pod for Andy Farrell's era. Like, it feels like it needs that big moment that kind of kicks things on. So that's where they will be in their minds. And absolutely, they think we're all clowns and that we're ignoring relevant facts and that we don't see the progress. We don't see what they're trying to do. But that's a very different viewpoint, and that's not of interest to us. We want to look at it from outside, base it on the performance we see on the pitch. And Bernard's right. There was improvement in Italy, absolutely. But that's not enough to convince us on the outside who've been watching this team for 2 years and seen these occasions where they haven't been good and maybe the lack of clear progress in the outcome on the pitch. So that's our viewpoint, and it's definitely different to theirs.
What were you most impressed by, to give them their dues, Murray, in terms of what they did in Rome? Was there one particular aspect of Ireland's game that looked a little bit more sharpened and improved to you than others?
Yeah, I thought that line-out attack was better. I thought it was clear. There was conviction to it as well. I thought the way the ball carriers timed their runs onto the ball was consistently better. Yeah, there's less line speed there, and definitely the Italian defence played into that. But Ireland's application of that, I thought, was better. Even individually, I thought a number of the players were good. Again, you're taking into account the poor opposition, but Johnny Sexton came back and played well. Robbie Henshaw, Gary Ringrose, really good in the midfield, and Farrell be glad he kind of probably kept with that combination and got that boost of confidence into those guys as well. Also, really positive to see Craig Casey and Ryan Baird come off the bench. That shouldn't be discounted just because it's Italy. Both of them did very well. Ryan Baird's first carry obviously was excellent, but I thought his 5 tackles really showed his athleticism as well. He looked quite dominant in those moments. 1-3 lineouts as well. A really busy cameo off the bench. And Casey, obviously, with his tempo, it definitely shouldn't be overlooked. Like, this is the way the game is going. You need a quick service at 9. I loved his 2 quick tap penalties. The first one was really quick. He scoots away down the left and keeps Italy on the back foot. The second one, there was a little bit more thought, but I loved the way he made the decision. Johnny Sexton's kind of strolling towards him. The usual thing of Ireland, slowing everything down, overthinking it maybe at times. And Casey just sees Conan calling for the ball and he's gone. And the next phase, lovely pass to Sexton, who delivers that beautiful miss to Earl. So really positive to see those bits. And even Conan off the bench I thought was good as well. So there is a bit of a bounce in those things, and that had to be the case this weekend. Let's not get ahead of it either. Like, that had to be the case. They come out of Rome with a bounce into the Scotland game. And I think they achieved that to an extent.
I know we have a strict no crack, no fun, no banter policy on the podcast, but in light of the sanctity of the dressing room being breached and Craig Casey's initiation song being broadcast to the world, and what a job he did, by the way, sung Wham with gusto. Kaylon in the group earlier in the week, Bernard, had a question for yourself, which was, what was your initiation song? And he also asked, what would Murray and Gav choose if Andy Farrell ever came calling? I think we can stick with the reality of life for the moment and ask you, Bernard, did you have one back in your Ireland debut or around the time?
Yeah. No, mine was Red as the Rose. An absolutely shocking rendition of it. Would you believe, more nervous? I was way more nervous about having to sing. That was the biggest fear I had when I joined a new team or whatever, was having to sing in front of the bus. I absolutely dreaded it. And I knew, like, I'd been in the Irish squad since 98, and I only got capped in 2005. So there were so many times I was like, oh, if I get capped this weekend, I'm going to have to sing. Like, absolutely shocking. But yeah, look, it was great to see Casey. Obviously, because they go on 2 buses, generally it happens on the bus. But obviously, because of COVID, it's 2 buses. So he did it in the dressing room. And look at that. Yeah, he's such a likable character and personality. It's great to see him, and I hope he never changes. I hope he keeps that innocence and hunger and desire, because it's got him to play for his country already, and who knows where it'll lead.
The more of that, the better as well. Like fans love seeing those little glimpses, and there's no harm in people seeing that. Yeah, the sanctity of the change room, whatever. But it's a fun moment that definitely adds to the cult of Craig Casey. He's got a lot of supporters, growing number of them. But that's good as well. Like that's good for Irish rugby to have a young guy like this who's unbelievably good already in the media. We got him. They put him up for interview right at the start of the championship, and he did a brilliant interview with a couple of us, just kind of going through his pathway. Really comfortable speaker. He definitely doesn't hate the media yet, and long may that continue, because some guys, it just gets bet out of them, and they just, I don't know, fear saying the wrong thing. He's a really good character, and that applies to his rugby as well. Like, what a thing for Johnny Sexton to say after the match, that he reminds me of what I've read about Johnny Wilkinson. Johnny Sexton doesn't say that kind of stuff lightly. And for a 21-year-old to be setting a standard in an Ireland squad, I think is just fantastic. It needed that as well, didn't it? Ireland's senior players, they needed to kick up the hole. They needed someone coming in and grabbing it off them and challenging their status as well. Like, you know, Craig Casey coming in, sitting up the front of the classroom with his notebook, and it sounds like speaking up as well. I think that's refreshing for everyone. Ryan Baird as well, by all accounts, has kind of put the cat amongst the pigeons a couple of times in the training sessions. And that's no bad thing. It's been a bit comfortable maybe for Ireland for too long. You want a bit of edge, and you want new guys coming in and freshening it up. So that's really positive.
Murray, what's your tune, for the love of God? I've been waiting for the last couple of minutes.
Oh, sorry. We did this on Monday as well, actually. Mine is still O Roche de Vahawalia. It's so easy. And usually people kind of join in, so they don't actually hear me singing, so that's good.
I
What about you, Gav?
When You Say Nothing at All by Ronan Keating. Just
I knew it was going to be cheesy.
Just the perfect pitch for me. Perfect pitch. Returning to actual rugby, Bernard, and before we move on from Ireland, it is all about Scotland now, and like there is a sense that, of course, backing up this victory in Italy and some of the good elements of the performance against Scotland and getting a win there could have a kind of a transformative impact, and just might be a springboard from which Ireland can actually kick on. These things are fickle enough, to be honest. You can criticise a team for 18 months, 2 years, whatever it is, but sometimes you just need that one, I'll say landmark victory. I don't think beating Scotland will be a landmark victory, but just something to galvanise the squad and really cement that belief. Did you see like areas of Ireland's performance in Rome that could be applicable to Scotland, like that could expose Scotland in ways? How much do you think Andy Farrell and Ireland need to stick to the game plan they deployed in Rome, or how much do they need to deviate from it in order to beat the Scots?
I think it'll be quite similar, to be honest. So, like, this is the makings of a very good Irish team, and I think the problem we'll have is that we'll never get hammered, right? As in, when I say that could be a problem, is that we'll always be unbelievably competitive against anybody because of the quality in the team, the work rate, the fighting spirit, etc. So that's sometimes a bad thing, because it doesn't expose potential areas to improve on, because you narrowly lose. Where sometimes you can imagine England now. I mean, you know, England after that Welsh performance, like I could see Eddie Jones starting to rebuild because it was so disappointing. But even though there were some elements of attack, etc., within it, but the fact that they've had a poor start to the Six Nations, and Scotland was a dominant performance by Scotland against England, and Wales were pretty dominant as well, particularly the last 20. So Eddie Jones may now say, we're at the end of that cycle, I got to rebuild again. And I know I've listened to him talk about it, and he said the art of coaching is you're going to have the end of a cycle. The good coaches minimize how long you stay in that and get back up. So I think Ireland are well capable of beating Scotland and England and finishing off the championship. And I do think that type of finish would be massive for us. I think that would then give us the belief that we haven't really had, it seems, since 2019 in a big way. I talked up Scotland before they came to the Viva in November. I thought they were on the right track, and they really flattered to deceive, and we were physically dominant. Now, they bounced back from that, obviously, to go to Twickenham and get a really good performance, and they have the excuse of the red card against Wales. So I'm not really sure if they're where they are, to be honest. You know, they always played good rugby. What I liked about them coming into November was they seemed to have a better balance, better scrum, better defence, better understanding of when to play and when not to play. And I still think they have improved. But I've no doubt that Ireland could go there and beat them. And all we were asking for was just more alignment, between kind of strategy and selection, and the elements of our defence and attack that weren't working. Once we get that right, and it's only small bits, and I agree with Murray, the fact that we saw that improvement from our set piece attack is a positive. So yeah, I think we can go to Scotland, but I think the biggest thing we can do is dominate them physically. And in fairness to Ireland, if you look at the core reason why we beat Italy was we got over the gain line with quick ball. And I think probably if and the challenge is going to be the selection. I'm fascinated to see the selection, because I actually think Kilcoyne, Kelleher, Connors make us better, right? But they aren't really first choice. They were rotations. Well, you would argue they were rotations for the Italy game. So if they come out of the team again, and we'll have less punch, and then maybe Scotland have a better chance. But I'd be pretty confident we can go there and win.
But why can't they be first choice? Sorry, Murray. Why can't they be first choice? They
may be. They may be. I'm not saying they aren't, but I'm just until we see the selection for Scotland, we don't know what way Faz is thinking, because they were the natural. It's not a risk to bring Kilcoyne in for Healy against Italy. It's not a risk to bring Kelleher in for Herring against Italy. But it is a risk to it's not a risk at all. But it's you're setting your stall out as then they're now number one, and Farrell has to prove that they are in his mind.
I think that would be really positive if we saw a bit of that, because I was going to say that was the last positive we should mention. It was the pack looked really good and balanced. As you say, the back row worked really well. One of the best things this championship has been Tadhg Byrne becoming, I suppose, a dominant force for Ireland. He's been the best player of the championship so far. Even moving to 6 worked well. You saw him in the wide channels a couple of times, and his work rate across the board is phenomenal. The ruck stats every week are really revealing on top of everything else he's doing. He's showing that he's got that side of his game as well. The second row pairing of Henderson Ryan, I think we haven't seen the best of that yet. It's very exciting. They've a nice complementary set of skills, and that front row was so dynamic. Tadhg Furlong looks really hungry to prove his point after a long time out. Kelleher is just a different athletic proposition, and then you had the handling ability for the Connors try down the left hand side. And I agree on Kilcoyne. He gives a whole lot of punch. I don't think Cian Healy has been at his best in the last couple of games, and can still play obviously a big role off the bench with how propping works and the time periods you get there. So yeah, it will be positive, I think, to give a sense of continuity with that pack. And it would definitely then, Birch, probably look like a kind of fresh Ireland, wouldn't it? Albeit just a couple of tweaks, but I think it would be brave and due, really. Those guys have earned a chance, I think, against Scotland.
Scotland will be lacking continuity to a certain extent, obviously, when that game does roll around. They'll have gone, 3 fallow weeks, if you like, circumstantially on the back of their game with France being postponed. Everybody knows the story at this point, and it looks like it'll be rescheduled for the end of March. I know you talked about it with Owen on the members pod on Monday, Murray, and you kind of suggested that really the fair thing to do would have been to award Scotland the game if, France were effectively owning up to Galtier having breached the bubble, guys going for waffles and just, basically not adhering to their biosecure bubble really at all, or at least having sort of different standards for theirs and it going up in smoke. We know as well that all of their international setups, 7s, 20s, women's in recent times have had sort of similar problems and far more problems than all of the other Six Nations countries. So there is a definite sense, I think, across the board of frustration, on behalf of rugby fans, when you know the sacrifices that the players, the setups are making in order for this competition to even go ahead to begin with, and in order for it to be completed on schedule. My own inclination, when I heard, okay, Galtier for sure broke the bubble, he went to watch his son's match, guys went out for food or whatever and broke the bubble, and they have so many cases. Honestly, my natural reflexive reaction was just piss off, just piss off out of the competition. It's just honest to God, what are you doing? You know what I mean? And then when I calm down a little bit, I understand completely why everybody wants them to remain in the competition, clearly. But also, like, even if Scotland were awarded a game, and they probably do, in my opinion, still deserve to be awarded a game, it just ruins it. It actually does ruin it. And even if you were the Scots and you won a championship with the 5-pointer against France that you didn't play, it's not even a caveat or an asterisk. Like, I think there's almost a guilt about that. So maybe this is the best conclusion. Are you surprised by this conclusion if it is confirmed? Or did you actually expect Scotland to be awarded the game when you were chatting to Owen on Monday?
I'm not a bit surprised, really. The French always find a way to kind of smooth these things out. And I think everyone's kind of come around to that. The fact that, yeah, we do want a complete championship, especially now that it looks like if it goes ahead, say on the 26th of March, that the Scottish players from the Prem will be released and you'll have the really meaningful fixture as it meant to be, and potentially both of them even going for a championship. It would be, you wouldn't get your Super Saturday, but it would be a pretty cool way to finish it, and you'd have that sense of completeness. So yeah, I'm kind of coming around to, I want to see it played now. But the really frustrating thing is that even just in France, they've just said nothing to see here. Galtier, no, completely cleared of any wrongdoing, and that, you know, essentially nothing bad happened here. It was just unlucky, and maybe that was it. Like, there's no definitive link certainly between Galtier going to watch that match and the outbreak, or the waffles, the lads going to get some waffles the night before the match and the outbreak. They said they tested them as soon as they came back into camp, and we won't see the report, but I suppose you've got to take them to the word at that. But you see Josh Adams banned for 2 games for his breach just before the championship, going to see his family, and Galtier's, I suppose, done the same here, but in Laporte's eyes, no, that's okay. That's not actually breaching our protocols. So that's frustrating for me, that there's no, I suppose, there's no punishment in that sense, that they can just kind of shrug their shoulders and get on with things. And yes, it could have actually, though, I think, and could have really disrupted things. And it is just frustrating that there's going to be no outcome in that sense. So I'm not surprised at that. At the same time, this is generally how it works out, and I think there's going to be loads more political outcome and fallout over this in France, and certainly seems to be the case. But yeah, this is the way it's ended up, and I suppose we got to get on with it.
Yeah, Bernard, you'd have your finger on the pulse of French rugby, very much so. And even myself, speaking to a couple of people who work in rugby over there at a couple of clubs, they're sort of mention a sense of embarrassment and nearly shame, actually, on behalf of, like, the rugby public, if not people necessarily working directly in the sport, in that they feel as though that the French team, like this coveted sort of national institution, has given the tournament a bit of a black eye. And I'm sure, like, listen, this will all blow over in due course, but just on behalf of fans over there, at least a portion of them, there is a sense of having let the tournament down, in a way, as strange as that sounds. And I guess that not being remotely replicated by the French setup is understandable as well, because if you're fronting up to these things and saying, like, yeah, we made an absolute balls of that, then you're probably drawing more calls for recourse against yourself, and it's just to your detriment, or to the detriment of your team. But have you been, like, chatting to people over there, or have you got a sense of how it's being perceived in France, like within rugby, but also just sort of people on the ground there?
Yeah, I have actually, and shock horror that the FFR have concluded their internal investigation, and there's absolutely no fault of anyone within the French management or team. So that's gone back to the Ministry of Sport, and it'll be interesting to see what she says about that. But look, I think we have to understand the background to this. So it wasn't the FFR who put the Six Nations in doubt. It came from the clubs around round 3 and round 4 of the Champions Cup, where there've been outbreaks in the clubs, and they blamed it on their matches against the Anglo-Saxon teams. And they didn't want to. Some of them didn't want to play round 3 and round 4 at that time, particularly clubs who were maybe in a relegation battle. So they canvassed the Minister for Sport, because if it comes from government, it's a different story, rather than the clubs actually saying, "Oh, we don't want to play." So the result of that was really strict protocols, stricter protocols than we've had for the Champions Cup, for all the 6 teams to sign up to, and it's pretty pretty clear that France haven't been as vigilant in those as everybody else. But if I'm not mistaken, people are saying, "Oh, why isn't it 28-0 to Scotland?" I actually don't think that's in the rule book, Murray, for this competition. So that was the issue. I think in the Champions Cup, they said if there's a match called off, the decision would be 28-0 to the team who haven't caused the postponement or cancellation. In the Premiership, they've decided on a different format where the points are allocated differently. And from what I can gather, the Six Nations Committee didn't decide to formally agree on what the consequence would be, because obviously they want to play every game, because obviously that affects the TV money, and it's a far smaller pool of games than in the Champions Cup or in the Gallagher Premiership. So that's probably where it's coming from. Look, I do think France have been really sloppy. I'm not surprised they haven't, put their hand up, or there's going to be no punishments, because that's just the way it works there. And Laporte is brilliant, visionary, etc., but he wouldn't be great on the detail and things. And what he said about, I don't see a problem with Fabien going to the match. I mean, it's outside the Creed protocol, so it's how it's agreed Fabien did, and the players, like, they've obviously broken the rules everyone else is under, but they've just said, the reporter said nothing to see, and Fabien wasn't a patient zero. It was apparently a sevens player and then a preparator physique, which is a fitness coach who brought it into the camp. But anyway, once I've parked that kind of disappointment that I feel Scotland were hard done by, I am actually happy that the tournament will actually finish properly, and maybe France will end up winning the Grand Slam, or Wales can win a Grand Slam, but at least we'll know who the best team was. So I am glad. I'm looking forward to seeing Scotland-France.
No, for sure. Were England hard done by, Bernard, or did you feel that in those last sort of 20 or so minutes after 24 all, that they, I guess, capitulated just enough to take the take the edge off the officials in that particular game in Cardiff?
Yeah, look, I think what happened in terms of the refereeing was really poor, and I can understand how it affected England's mentality. They must have felt so wronged, and in fairness, I think that Eddie Jones, will use this as a kind of a case study in terms of how they need to be able to deal with people against them and poor. I remember Cheika used to referee our matches internally at training, and I'm not sure if it was a plan or not, but he was particularly biased and made some incredible decisions. And he always said it was to try and get us to be able to adapt to poor refereeing or whatever. But I think that, look at Gozer and his coach and his refereeing team, had a very poor match, and we saw in the Ireland game the Henderson TMO. I mean, it's unacceptable, but it's not a surprise because we've seen it coming. We've seen it coming. So hopefully that'll be the reason, the compelling reason to actually look at the refereeing standards. And I think Joe Schmidt's got a huge job in his hands, because his role now encompasses that, which is different than before. And I do have massive faith in his ability to get it fixed. And I do feel sorry for England, to be honest. I think the last 20 minutes, I looked at Itoje's actions and the 5 penalties. I mean, a couple of them are very marginal. There's one offside block down where he's not offside. And it came in from the touch judge. So things kind of got out of hand and they free and quite quickly on England. And in fairness, Wales look like a different team now, and that's why we're talking about that landmark win. I mean, Wales had no confidence in 2020. They went into the Ireland game, really worried about what could happen. They got the win there. They grew into the game against Scotland. Obviously, they got a red card, and obviously they got 2 very lucky tries in that game against England. But the way they were playing at the end, you'd say that was the Wales of old. And it's amazing in sport how breaks at the right time can completely change the dynamic. And look at Ireland in 19 or in 18 with a drop goal from Sexton. It changed our dynamic from round one. So I think England. The worrying thing for me about England was they actually, some of their attack was the best attack they've shown all competition, or maybe even in last year. And if they get that right, and when they get their pack back on track and their discipline back, they could be an even better team and a harder team to defend. So it's going to be fascinating end of tournament. And I think bar the Italy games, all the other games have been brilliant, really entertaining. And if you think back to November, we're talking around, international rugby's boring. I think we're seeing some good, real quality rugby, which is great.
A lot of it is cyclical, really, isn't it? Even these patches that England go through, we see it every couple of years, and you kind of feel as though maybe Jones has reached the end of his tether with this team, and nah, just wait and see. I want to stick with the referees for the moment, and also stick with yourself, Bernard. I'm not trying to coax you into one of your famous rants necessarily, but wanted to ask you about, say, what you feel Joe Schmidt could do in order to improve the situation. And before I
think...
sorry, just before you answer that, because I know we'll get blowback from people for criticising referees, and people will point out to us all, probably individually on Twitter, how difficult the job it is, and so on. And we're fully aware of that, and I think we've all said that on the record as well. This isn't about necessarily criticising individual referees. It's just really more so about talking about trends in officiating across the board that at times is ruining games, and not only the spectacle of it, but even changing results now at this point. And it's more so, I think, a conversation about how referees are being trained and how to better equip them to do their jobs properly, rather than leave it go down this path that it's on, because you do get a collective sense that people are losing patience an awful lot the more and more that these types of refereeing performances are popping up, particularly in massive games like the one in Cardiff. So to go back to my original question, Bernard, what does Schmidt do to actually address that situation?
Yeah, look at obviously people expect a rant, etc., and I actually am anti-referees at all. I just see an area of our game that I love that is getting further away from where we need to be, and unfortunately it's been exposed at the highest level with a lot of eyes on it, and I feel sorry for Pascal Gozer. How I think Joe Schmidt could improve it would be to not treat referees and TMOs the exact same. So we've seen some referees who maybe fall out of form or they want off the circuit being given TMO jobs, and I actually think they can do more harm there than they could as a touch judge or a referee. So I would say, if you think that referees are like GPs, okay, general practitioners or whatever, the TMO should be like a surgeon. They could be just specialist TMOs, because they only need to go to them 3 or 4 times a game. But when they do, they need to be right, and they need to be absolutely specialist in that. And also, I think the referee needs to trust them. And I remember speaking to Nigel Owens about his refereeing, and he said to me that he used to look, and they put him together. Derek Bevan, who's an old referee, they had a great relationship on and off the field. And he said because they worked together on a lot of high-profile games and because they were close, effectively there's that trust between them. And if Nigel was going down a rabbit hole, Derek had the ability to say, Nigel, no, you're wrong there. You need to actually look at this again. And likewise, if Nigel knew from Derek's communication and style when something was marginal, etc. So I think that could be an area, there's massive pressure on TMOs, and Alexander Roos, who was the TMO for the game against for the Welsh England game, he's an international referee. It doesn't mean he's going to be the best TMO in the world. So that would be the one thing I would say that Joe Schmidt could potentially look at as a way of helping referees, helping them, because it's very difficult. It is very difficult, and I think being thrown into a situation. And you look at Gaelic, and I think referees bring their own linesmen in certain games. I'm not saying we have to go down that route, but if you could have, a team of top TMOs, and maybe they're all ex-referees, and maybe they're all current, some of them are current referees, but they are trained up in the art of analysis, communication, decision making. Lucky enough, I spent some time in air traffic control, right, and just studying their behaviors. And I mean, the training they have and the ability to deal with pressurized situation, to give concise information to a pilot, a team of pilots who are circling an airport. I mean, it's a different skill to meet a pilot, right? And it's just something I think that, I think a good TMO can make an average referee better, and that's what we want to do. We want to get games decided upon by teams' quality play rather than 2 tries that shouldn't have been given, and other like sending offs or not sending offs or whatever. Like that does happen. It does happen, unfortunately, more often now than ever. So that'll be my bit of advice or idea.
Murray, I have a theory as well.
Judgment advice.
I'm sure he'd take it on board, Rich, when he tunes in. I have a theory about like just the dynamic between officials at the moment, Murray, in terms of there being very few disagreements actually when it comes to decisions like that involving the TMO, that generally speaking now, and I think it's far more frequent now than it used to be, there's an element of confirmation bias that sort of sets in, groupthink if you like, where a referee might propose what he or she has seen on the field. Lineswoman may likely agree with it, and then the TMO will basically confirm it, or there might be a little bit of a reversal of order in there. I think one way to potentially change that a little bit is to actually demand that the TMO makes a recommendation first, particularly if they're pulling up an incident, and then let the referee agree or disagree with it rather than the other way around, because it does feel usually as though the referee is very much just in that particular group on that particular day is sort of the boss, and like there's an unwillingness to question him or her at the moment. I also think though that it's a perfectly natural situation in which we find ourselves with groups of officials agreeing with each other. I feel in an era when their performances are being scrutinized to within an inch of their lives because of the advent of social media over the last decade or more, where people have actual access to a lot of these human beings with the whistle, and where there's actual written discourse, if you like, about their performance, not just internal reviews, anything like that, but like public, external discussions about how they're performing. It's perfectly natural then for officials to feel as though they're more under the cosh than ever, and therefore like further unionize and feel as though just on some subconscious level they have to support each other and support each other's decisions, because it's like it's us against the entire world at the moment. You know what I mean? That I think it's almost like they don't want to throw each other under the bus or hang each other out to dry in that moment, and that was probably less prevalent a decade ago. I suppose I'm kind of not asking a question, but just going off on one here myself a little bit. But I wonder, is there any merit at all in what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely the dynamic is in a strange place, and I agree with you. Like the Lewis Rees-Zammit one is a prime example. I'd love to have been in all their heads at that time, and surely at least one of that match official team is thinking, not a hope, man. That's clearly a knock on. It comes forward off his hand, as I think most of us did, and anyone who watch it back now, including Gozer, would say. It reminds me, I think I've mentioned before, that bit in Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers where the plane is hurtling towards a mountain and the co-pilot is just kind of too scared or doesn't want to disrespect the authority of the pilot, and they end up crashing into the mountain because they don't say anything. Now, obviously, it's not that grave an incident, but I think there probably are instances where people are kind of like, really? Even the Owen Farrell one against Italy, where I felt it was a late tackle and should have been brought back to a penalty. I suppose you could debate that one, but I'm sure people within that match official team felt, maybe I should say something, but you're right, they don't want to upset that authority. So that's probably something for Joe Schmidt and the referees to work on. And then the mental skill side of it as well. Like any player, there's so much pressure in those moments, and it's just these things happen so quickly. Even for Gozer, when they say to kick one from Bigger for Adam's try, he's got like a couple of seconds to kind of go, oh, what do I do here? And in that instance, he probably said, I'm just going to double down and confirm that decision. So that side of it, away from even the laws and the decision making, that's massive as well. And definitely, I think Joe Schmidt is going to have a bigger influence as we go. There was a couple of interesting law ones even over the weekend. I thought the chasers ahead of the kicker, the offside penalties, we saw a number of them in the Ireland game. Obviously, they were quite decisive. We saw a load of them in the Pro 14 as well, in the Leinster game as well. So I think it's good that referees are focusing on that. Hopefully that opens up a bit more counter-attacking space. The kick return players, guys like Stuart Hogg with one less defender right on top of them with a chance to break, that'll be massively positive for the game. We also saw the 3 penalties in the Ireland game for the double banking at the line out, which is something that has been I suppose, consistently overlooked for the last number of years. It'll be interesting whether that was just him going on a kind of flyer himself, or whether referees look to kind of clamp down on that. But I think we'll see more and more influence from Joe Schmidt over the next year or so.
But just Murray and Gav on that. So the Josh Adams try, I mean, you know, like that warranted a look from a TMO point of view. I mean, and I just think because Gozer doubled down with Farrell and didn't want to listen to him, Alexander Roos probably felt, I got to support them here, because it was such a confrontational discussion, and that's what I've been seeing constantly for the last year and a half, is that lack of respect for each other's opinions. And I know people are saying, oh, well, Owen Farrell, the way he spoke to Gozer was out of order, but like he just feels completely wronged. And like Gozer now has come out and said, yeah, look, I made a mistake. It shouldn't have been a try. So Farrell was right in that situation, and you have to trust. Like, there's a difference. Like, you should be able to know by players' body language when they're trying it on, or when they're genuine. Like Henderson's try. I mean, like a minute later, he's saying, "Look, I scored a try. He knew he scored a try, but no, we've looked at it." And again, there was a case where the referee didn't want to go and challenge Poit, who was the TMO, who again has probably refereed 500 top class games and maybe been TMO for 10 top class games. You know what I mean? It's like it's not the same skill, I don't think. And I think you're better off having real specialist TMOs who can do it till they're 65 or 66, who build up that experience and that assurance in their own ability, who maybe aren't close to the either they're very close to referees and they work together constantly, or they're not close to referees at all, but they're just experts in their own field. And I just think having referees do it, particularly if they don't do it regularly, doesn't help either. But it's that ability to say, hang on, yeah, just have a look at that there. And I know we don't want to be going to TMOs all the time, but if Owen Farrell is reacting like that, if Henderson's reacting like that, you got to go, Jesus, like. And if it turns out they're taking the mick, punish him then or whatever. But that was a try. There was 3 tries in the weekend. One wasn't given that should have been, and two that weren't tries were given. Like, it's mental. It's mental.
Before we move on from the refs, just one last question for yourself, Bernard. And we have touched upon it only probably 3 or 4 episodes ago of this podcast, but you touched upon it there again. And I guess it's the nature with which some referees at the moment seem to be dealing with players. And I felt Gozer, like, as much as I do have an element of sympathy for him in the aftermath of all of this, because it's not nice to be publicly scrutinized and criticized, like, in various countries, not to mind your own. But like, it was the contempt with which he treated Farrell that annoyed me, to be honest. Like, I just don't know. Listen, I can completely understand how somebody could be annoyed by Owen Farrell. I understand how particularly people who aren't from England wouldn't necessarily be massive fans of his. But like, when you're dealing with somebody in a work environment, if you like, or in a kind of a professional situation, ideally you'd hope people would actually just treat each other with respect. And like, I don't understand where the kind of animosity comes from, if you like. Now, to be fair, I'm saying I don't understand where that comes from. I haven't had Owen Farrell in my ear for the previous however minutes, the way Gozer likely did. But it's like, I wonder, like, with Schmidt or whoever, like, let's take a collective step back a small bit here and just, like, remember to actually speak to each other like adults, not this kind of teacher-student type dynamic that's crept into interactions between the referee and player, which honestly will wind up pissing off players more and exacerbate the situation in terms of how they're interacting with referees, but also annoys fans at home. It doesn't reflect well on referees. Sometimes I don't even think they want to be treating players like that, but they feel as though they need to be seen to, if you like. Like, I think that type of, it's like that relationship just needs a bit of a reset. And I don't know, does that come from like World Rugby dialogue between both parties, or some kind of some kind of an email sent around, like, might not be strong enough. But I do think that needs to be addressed. Just the dynamic between referee and player seems very unhealthy, and I feel as leading to or exacerbating a lot of these mistakes. because referees feel dug in, like they feel more. It seems as though they feel more on the back foot than they have in the past, and players are getting just more annoyed because more of the decisions are wrong. So it's like on both sides, self-fulfilling and self-perpetuating, if you like.
Yeah,
I'm trying.
100%, and I said it on Monday night on Against the Head. I think 3 criteria for referees are fitness, relationship building, knowing the laws, and I think the priorities at the moment is just fitness. Fitness is the number one, which is fine. The game's got faster, etc. I think they all have a fair idea of the laws, and obviously I'm not saying they don't make mistakes. Mistakes will happen, and then the third one is the relationship building, and I think that's the big one. And then I actually saw a lot of people say, "Oh, it's not the referee's fault. It's Owen Farrell's fault. It's Johnny Sexton's fault, etc." Doesn't matter whose fault it is. They're appointed captain of their country. We need to start again, and and probably I think this last weekend is going to be the plane crash and the black box. They're going to have to actually this summer work out a way of starting again and trying to rebuild that trust and respect both ways that we all talk about as one of rugby's values. I know it sounds cheesy and corny or whatever, but at the moment it's not a good example for the kids, like seeing that interaction and lack of respect, and professional rugby is only a tiny microcosm of the game, and that's what the whole thing around concussion bins and concussion treatment, seeing the senior players and international players, elite players treating it better, has pushed all the way down. So now, if a kid gets a bang in the head at 8, an 8-year-old, everyone knows that take him off, whatever. And I just think at the moment, what we're seeing on the pitch is not good for creating respect the whole way down. And I do think it needs to be sorted out, and I think it will be. I think unfortunately we needed that car crash of the weekend, and I don't see many captains having a really good relationship with referees anymore. So is it because the players don't have the ability to have a relationship with referees, or has something changed? And so that's what I'm saying. People are blaming Farrell, Sexton. Tell me a captain who you can see relaxed, calm, and a nice interchange. I haven't seen one for a while. So I think I'm not putting blame on them. It's something that's happened that we just need to fix.
I definitely think they do have a responsibility on the relationship building side as well, though. Like, as you say, it's not the first time it's happened. I think referees are going in with, particularly around those two guys, a preconception of what it's going to be like. And I think I can imagine myself, first decision off, here he is now. I can see him coming towards me. He's got the scowl in the face. I do think those two guys in particular can be better at managing those relationships. And I agree, the refs definitely do have a dismissive attitude to an extent, but I almost can't blame them in a way for dreading refereeing those two guys. You're right, there's no one with an unbelievable relationship. I'm trying to think of the other Six Nations. They probably haven't had those kind of contentious decisions to deal with either.
Alan Wynne's been delighted with himself.
He probably has, and the very best captains, even someone like Richie McCaw, who was constantly on the limit. I don't know, I can't remember him being that confrontation or having that many fallouts. It was calmer. Even when I think of Paul O'Connell with referees, there were times where he vented, but there were other times where he was calm. And even when Rory Best, I suppose, and the big Ireland successes, he was very calm with referees. So I do think those two guys in particular have a responsibility as well. And it's definitely something they've both spoken about working on anyway.
I mean, the moral of the story really is don't name your out half captain. They're just too sensitive. Let me ask you about the Lions tour. We're clocking up another marathon time here, so we'll keep this fairly brief. And there's not maybe a huge amount to say at the moment. We're still sort of awaiting official decisions, confirmations, and so on. Well, I'll stick with yourself, Murray, just to get your overall thoughts on the prospect of a home tour at the moment. What's your sort of hype level for something like that? I'm bringing up a lot of scales here, but say on a scale of 1 to 10, how enthused would you be by the prospect of the Lions coming, or the Lions remaining rather, in this neck of the woods and bringing up the box?
Yeah, I'm a 10. I'm only thinking of this in a selfish way of what are the chances of me getting to cover the Lions tour this summer. So if it's closer to home and if the UK can host it and we get even 4 tests, as it sounds like might happen away, I think the tradition, everything is great, but I just think given the circumstances we're in, just do whatever you can to get it played now at this state. We've dragged it on. They've clearly not. We spoke about it at the very start. They could have pushed it back, we felt at the start, but it's continued on, and it's clear they're going to do whatever they can to get it played. So if that's in the UK, I think given the circumstances and the opportunity for fans to be there with the vaccine levels in the UK, bring it on.
I mentioned at the start of the show that like when it was first broached, I was really enthusiastic about the prospect myself, and I think it was Tom English from the BBC had sort of broken the story or reported that, say, Croke Park could be a venue over the Aviva, and I felt as though, wow, like a team with a really strong British contingent, like literally with British in their name, playing a home game at Croke Park, there might be a little bit of a historic hue to that. And then you think it's 2021, 100 years on, and like it's a special year for the country, and all this kind of bullshit effectively, that I'd kind of convinced myself it might have some kind of like nice meaning. And I'm not talking about sort of 2007 levels of hysteria and a nation maturing, quote unquote, and all of that nonsense, but more so that it might be a nice sporting occasion for the country. But that was back in these days of innocence where I felt that by this summer we'd have crowds back in stadiums, and the reality is that we're certainly not going to have that in Ireland now, and therefore my enthusiasm for this has eroded altogether, really. Like, I'm sure if you can do it in the UK and there will be fans there, it seems great, but Birch, the more I hear about it, the more I read about it, the more it feels like they're just scrambling to get it done, and it feels more like a box ticking exercise than a Lions tour. And we all know why they want to get it done and why they will, but that to me does actually detract from the mystique at this point, just that they feel as though they're under such pressure to just get it done. It reduces my level of excitement for it. I'm wondering if you're the same, or are you kind of on a similar scale to Murray?
No, I'm the same. I'm completely underwhelmed by the idea of it being held in the UK, and I still am skeptical it will be. I know there's a lot of stakeholders who need it to happen, etc. But yeah, I'm in favour of pushing it, to be honest, and finding a slot for it somewhere else. And I know it's hard on the players who potentially will miss, out this year at the peak of their career or whatever. But I just, look, maybe I'll grow it into the idea of it being. I'm not gonna, if it's on this summer, I'll obviously be massively into it. But really underwhelmed by the idea.
We're looking ahead to the more short-term, immediate future. Murray, interpros back this weekend, and we haven't been given the Pro 14 the love it deserves over recent weeks, purely due to time constraints and the fact that there's a lot to speak about internationally. And I know we're squeezing it into the end of the show here as well, but give us your thoughts on both of them. Like, obviously the provinces are coming in, all of them in good form. So it's like, on the one hand, and that'll be a conversation for down the road, competition not in great nick, you'd have to say. On the other hand, like, it's nice that all of them come into this bringing with them an element of form, and probably all fancying their chances of a win. It's the best type of weekend with plenty of high quality players available to them as well.
Yeah, it's the best kind of fallow weekend for Six Nations, definitely, given that Connacht and Ulster are essentially playing to keep their, albeit slim, I suppose, final hopes alive and keep the pressure on Munster and Leinster. The Pro 14 final is on the weekend after the Six Nations, which seems crazy. It's so soon, later this month. And we're really building up to that, and some really decent teams. I just saw the Munster and Connacht teams named there. A couple of guys back from international camp with points to prove and minutes to get into their legs, as well as some of that young talent as well, like Gavin Coombs. Ben Healy's getting a start at 10 for Munster, it looks like, and Carberry on the bench again. So there's loads of different points of interest here, and I think they're going to be really ferocious games. As we say, during Six Nations kind of period, you often those provincial games don't quite capture the imagination, but these ones are perfectly set up to do so, and give a few guys a chance to further their reputation and show their potential to Andy Farrell, who'll be watching closely. So I'm really excited about this weekend, and I think we're going to get two fantastic Interpro games.
Bernard, Munster and Connacht, your prediction there, please?
Yeah, I think Munster. I think Munster. I like the way they kind of controlled the last 20 minutes against Cardiff, and I think they're just a little bit. I know it's close, but I think they're a step ahead at the moment.
Any chance that Ulster upset the apple cart a little bit against Leinster and Ravenhill the following day?
Yeah, I fancy Ulster, to be honest. I think Leinster will be a little bit worried around some of their defence over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, discipline was an issue against the Dragons. And against Glasgow, I thought they didn't look as comfortable. Now, look, they can fix that quite easily. But I think it's it's win or bust for Ulster. I like Ulster's back three, and realistically, Ulster need to chase a 5-pointer. So I'm actually up there for Premier Sport. I'm looking forward to it. I think it could be a cracking game.
Murray, your predictions for both games?
I'll go boring Leinster Munster, but I do think they'll be like unbelievably good battles. Both Ulster and Connacht trying to have really been building to this point, and as Bernard says, a few guys back even for Ulster in the back three. So it's going to be enthralling. I'm down to Thomond Park actually tomorrow, and can't wait to see that in person.
Class. Murray, thanks for your time.
Cheers.
And Bernard, the very same to you. Thanks a million as always.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you folks at home for tuning in as well. Thanks to all the 42 members for your questions and for your continued support of our independent sports journalism. members.the42.ie if you want to join us. Join the famous WhatsApp group and get all of the extra podcasts, including Rugby Weekly Extra, including Behind the Lines with Gavan Cooney, which you heard a snippet of in the middle of this show, and many, many more offerings as well. If you have time at all, if you could leave us a rating and review, that would be absolutely smashing. We really appreciate those of you who have so far. This podcast was brought to you in association with William Hill. Remember to gamble responsibly and visit dunlewy.net on how to do so. Enjoy the Pro 14 action over the weekend, and until Monday and indeed Thursday for non-members, mind yourselves, take it easy.